how to create boundaries and barriers as you are going through the divorce process. Many times, especially if you're a people pleaser, you might sit back and wait for somebody to tell you what to do and how to do it. This really helps you to know that there are some boundaries that you can create. How can you advocate for yourself and make yourself a priority through the divorce process? And then we have an excellent episode for people who are business owners or entrepreneurs. Many times I saw where maybe it was the husband who owned the business, the wife may not have worked in it and thought she had no right to those assets. Well, in most states that are equal or equitable distribution, there are rights to the assets of that. Just because the woman stayed home does not mean she did not help to build that business or help to build the marital assets.
Welcome to Faith Over Addiction podcast, where the chains of fixing and striving are broken and joy is rediscovered in Christ. You are here because you know there's more for you, a life beyond addiction's chaos, rooted in God's peace and promises. This is the place where Christian women like you learn to release the weight of fixing and striving and instead lean into God's strength to create a home filled with love, grace, and hope. She is clothed with strength and dignity. Proverbs 31:25. That's you. You may not feel like it yet, but you are stronger than you know. And God has so much more for you than carrying someone else's addiction. Here, we'll uncover how to set healthy boundaries with love and a little humor. Find resilience and grace in the messy moments of life. Celebrate small victories and embrace joy like never before. Lean into God's promises for restoration and strength because He's not done with your story or your loved ones. This is your invitation to rise up, embrace your worth in God's kingdom, and take back what's been stolen by addiction, your peace, your joy, your future. Your faith is the foundation and your boundaries are the bridge, and God's truth is your guide. I'm Tanya Joya, your host and fellow traveler on this journey through the chaos of addiction. I'm here to cheer you on, equip you with tools that work, and share the truth that's changed my life. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Nehemiah 8:10. Together, we'll uncover how to create safe, loving space for healing, starting with your own heart and home. By setting boundaries, trusting God's plan, and embracing His truth, you can reclaim your joy, your peace, and your family's future. Then you will be able to stand firm for your family and legacy as a kingdom daughter, a woman who can laugh at the days to come, knowing her identity is secure in Christ. So grab a cup of coffee or tea and get comfortable. Let's walk this journey together. We're about to take back what's been stolen, create a safe, healing space for you and your family, and rediscover the joy God has waiting for you. So welcome, Faith Over Addiction family. We are stepping into something that Lisa's going to bring us some great information about, and that's silver divorce. And if I understand from Lisa correctly, that's on the rise. So give us a little bit about your background history and what you are doing now with the Silver Divorce podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Tanya. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I was a healthcare executive, and I was over marketing, communications, physician sales, a bunch of stuff at a healthcare system. And I retired. And after I retired, I was hit with divorce. I was blindsided with divorce, and I had been married 34 years. So in that process of trying to figure out how do you go about it? What are the laws? What am I entitled to? How is this going to work? I discovered that gray divorce is actually booming. And that is right now, 1 in 3 divorces today are with people over the age of 55. So there has been a continued explosion since COVID of older people who've been married for decades divorcing. And like me, they didn't know what to do. They don't know, what their rights are, a huge knowledge gap. So as I got through that process and started to come out the other side, I thought, I have learned so much. I would like to be able to share what I've learned with other people. And I always believed that I was given some gifts of being able to communicate, knowing how to get messages out into the world, if you will, for other people. And so I thought a podcast would be a perfect opportunity to start to help people as they're going through what is just absolutely a traumatic time in their lives.
Absolutely. And her topics are so relevant, especially if this is something that you, as you said about yourself, are totally blindsided. Give us a list of the topics that you have shared with people on your podcast.
Oh gosh, it is everything from how to create boundaries and barriers as you are going through the divorce process. Many times, especially if you're a people pleaser, you might sit back and wait for somebody to tell you what to do and how to do it. This really helps you to know that there are some boundaries that you can create. How can you advocate for yourself and make yourself a priority through the divorce process? And then we have an excellent episode for people who are business owners or entrepreneurs. Many times I saw where maybe it was the husband who owned the business, the wife may not have worked in it and thought she had no right to those assets. Well, in most states that are equal or equitable distribution, there are rights to the assets of that. Just because the woman stayed home does not mean she did not help to build that business or help to build the marital assets. Also, we have a lot of topics related to the emotions of going through a divorce. One I love is the identity crisis. You do go through a crisis after being a wife for 30 years. Who am I? I'm not a wife anymore. I'm not a mother because my children are grown. They don't need me like they used to. And then also, if you just retired, which was in my case, I went through an identity crisis because I was nobody's boss. I couldn't tell somebody what to do and have them jump and do it. It was like, I'm not a boss. I'm not, a mentor. I'm not a wife. Who am I? So that's one of the episodes I love as well. So
That's fantastic. And the depth with which you explore this is something that gives people a way to hang on. Now, your
yes.
experience was even deeper than that. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just a divorce. There were other things that that led up to this that were causing issues in the marriage. Are you
Right.
comfortable sharing about that?
Yeah, I can share about that. There were issues with alcohol use in the marriage and that heavy alcohol use. So it was a high conflict divorce, very high conflict. And we ended up in mediation because Tennessee is a mandatory mediation state, but it took nearly a year for it. And it was a very contentious process. So.
What would you say for folks who are going through this? What were the things that you turned to stabilize yourself, to reform your identity?
So one of the most important things was going through divorce care. Divorce care is a Christian-based program. It is 12 weeks long and it walks you through all the phases of divorce. And I went through it twice. The first time you go through it, you're raw in the divorce process and you're so emotional. Most of what you're focused on is how could this happen and why, how did we get here?
Mhm.
And then I went through it the second time and I was further along in the divorce process. And you start to think about what's the future going to look like. And you also start to think about forgiveness. and how can you incorporate forgiveness as a gift to yourself so that you can move forward in your life without bitterness, without hate. And that was critical. I also went through therapy. I was able to do that thanks to Medicare. Medicare pays for a number of therapy sessions, and that helped me to manage my anger. I brought my daughters to sessions with me so that we could all talk about what was happening. And I would highly recommend that because, we uncovered that how they felt. They felt some guilt over the divorce. Was it my fault? Was it because, you were watching my children too much? Did we play into the divorce? So that I would highly recommend having your kids go to a session with you to get out their feelings. So
Oh,
those were,
I want to come back to that.
yeah,
Let's go into forgiveness though.
yes.
Um, what what was it like for you to begin to unpack all of that?
Oh gosh, at first, when I went through divorce care and there was the session on forgiveness, I thought, you have to be kidding me. He put me through, hell and back. There's no way I'm forgiving him. And I was seething with hatred for how the process went down. The legal process is very contentious, and if you have an attorney who's very aggressive, they will just hit you with filings after filings. And you turn that to your spouse, as being the genesis of that. And so you really, you just seethe with this hatred. And I came to a point, one of the things that I was doing is wanted to read the Bible in a year. I had started that year. And as I read the Bible over and over again, we were called to forgive. And I could feel in that calling my heart start to soften. And to a point where I realized that forgiveness isn't for him, forgiveness is for me. Forgiveness is so that I don't walk around with all this bitterness and I don't walk around with hatred, because after all, we are not the ones that are supposed to judge man, right? It is supposed to be up to God to judge, not us. So it was a long process and it came in steps. It wasn't like one day I decided that and it was over. It was, 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, and making a conscious decision every time a really bad negative thought came up. I had to stop myself and say, wait a minute, how does this play into forgiveness? So, forgiveness wasn't also just a gift for me, but for my kids too, because, you find yourself, man, as much as you don't want to be that person who talks negatively about their father, they were adults. And, I would find myself too many times saying things that were not kind. I had to stop that. That's their dad. I had to stop that too. So.
Let's dig just a little bit deeper. So you were talking about taking all your thoughts captive, which I think is a project for all of us, to not go down that rabbit hole of if it could have been, or I'm so angry that da, 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 da. How did the forgiveness play into you being able to talk kindly about your former spouse, about their father to them? How were you able to make that shift?
Oh gosh, I found myself, first of all, I didn't want anything to do with him. I didn't want to be around him. If he was going to be at a child's baseball game, I would make sure I was not at that game. And um, after I made the shift in of I can forgive and I can be at peace, then the next time that I saw him, we actually had a conversation and it didn't trigger me. It didn't trigger me like it would have before. But I want to go back to part of what I had to let go of was not only the hatred for the legal process and how it went down, you have to let go of the money. And,
Mm-hmm.
In a long-term divorce, in a long-term marriage where there are a number of assets, and you have to split those assets. I was the career woman, and there was assets that I had been able to accumulate through my divorce, through my work, and those were split. So part of the hatred was for having to give up what I had worked for, right? I had worked for that money and I shouldn't have to give it up, and he's going to get what I worked for. At some point, you have to let go of the money and say, the money's the money. I Once you give up the hatred for the process and the anger over losing money, then you get closer to forgiveness. So, and the funny thing is, once you give up the focus on the money, God has a way of providing. Every step, every step of the way, He has provided for me and has opened opportunities for me. And this podcast has been a wonderful opportunity to help other people. And my heart opened wider than it ever has because I went through this very painful process. So,
Those are some absolutely phenomenal words of hope, that on the other side of this very painful experience, you have been blessed not only with resources, but opportunities to share with other people. And one of the things that you talk about is also in the long-term marriage, that you had said it earlier, the wife who may not have been the main earner doesn't feel like she is entitled to anything. What statistically happens? You were sharing those with me
mm-hmm.
earlier.
Yeah, so typically in a long-term marriage, in most states, it is considered equitable or equal distribution. But if you've been married 10 years, it is 50-50. Nearly all of the judges will rule 50-50 in a long-term marriage, and long-term marriage is considered over 10 years. So in the case of where perhaps there was a business, um, there is a business valuation that you would want to have ordered so that the value of the business is documented. And then that value is split 50-50. And there's a negotiation process as to how that equity is going to be distributed. But, the stay at home mom provided a tremendous service. The stay-at-home mom is the reason that the man could go to work and focus 100% on the business and the career, because she was there to take care of everything, the children, the sports activities, the homework, what have you. So there is a tremendous dollar value to that, and most of the courts today now recognize that dollar value.
Absolutely. And that executive, I mean, I heard something that the wife that stays home and handles all of those things that we don't even think about, that's
Right.
about $180,000 if
Oh,
you put an
I
annual salary on her,
I believe that,
and
yes.
often the family doesn't make that anyway, but that would be for all the things that she does. And what kept you able to be in the process and go through divorce care twice, rather than just throwing up your hands and saying, I'm not growing, I'm not processing, I'm just going to be angry?
Well, I personally
Mhm.
did not want to be that woman who all she talked about was her divorce.
Mm.
I did not want to be that person who time stopped for them, and that was essentially the end of their growth. I saw it as, divorce was, it's one event. It's one event in my life, and I've had many other challenges. I went through breast cancer,
Mm.
and made it to the other side, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason that I was put through that pain, and after that there was tremendous growth. And I looked at it the same way. Okay, God, I know you have a plan. I know you know what you're doing. It's up to me to pay attention and see the light at the end of the tunnel. And if I had stayed in hatred and I had stayed in anger, I would never have seen that light. The curtain would never have opened. You have to open your heart to receive what God has intended for you. So,
Let's swing back to the children. So you chose, and we don't think about this as much with adult children, right? And both of you
right.
were
Yeah.
adult. You chose to bring them into the sessions. And how much did your forgiveness, your being able to be kind in your speech, change their perspectives or aid in them healing?
What I'm seeing now is they are feel like they can talk about their father. They can tell me things, and I'm not talking about telling me the scoop or the tea or anything like that, but just as you normally would talk about going to visit, and my grandson can talk about what fun he had at his grandfather's house, and nobody's afraid to bring his name up. Nobody
Mhm.
has to walk on eggshells around me, and I can see that playing into their healing. They don't see it as that they were part of the divorce now. I believed it aided them in saying, okay, this, we as a family are going to heal from this, and we're all going to move forward. And we don't have to keep these two people compartmentalized because we're afraid to bring their name up.
Mhm.
So I think that's what played into it the most.
And when you brought them into the therapy sessions, were you afraid of what you were going to hear? Or were you at a place where you could hear some things that were painful or judgmental on their part? How did that feel to bring them into the therapy sessions?
Yeah, I was very nervous because, you always, there's always different stories of childhoods. And, your version of what you think you did is in raising your children. And then there's their version of
Yes,
events.
yes,
and,
yes.
and I was really afraid to hear their version of events. And um, it for one of my daughters, she really felt as though the divorce was partly her fault. And the rationale for that was not even in the realm of possibility, but she had to be told that. If she hadn't have come to the session with me and verbalized that, she would have just been carrying that guilt and carrying that pain for no reason.
Mhm.
So once they went through the therapy session, they all, I believe, felt so much better about what was going to happen going forward, and that our family would be intact. We would be okay. The legal process is just that, it's a legal process, and then it will be over. So,
Yes. Yes. And it does for most families, it does finally settle itself and then you rebuild. What have you been doing? I know you've been doing the
yeah,
podcast.
right.
What else have you been doing in your rebuild phase?
Yeah. Well, the podcast is a huge part of it. I'm very now focusing in on the emotional aspects of divorce for people, and helping them also with various tips. I do tip days every Wednesday on my Facebook page, and those are more related to some of the legal aspects, but then also even things like, how do you respond when people say strange off the wall things when they hear you're getting divorced? Helping people just navigate life. So I find that that is one of the areas that people need the most help in, how to navigate life when you're going through divorce. So I've been focused on that. And then I'm getting ready to launch a new podcast called The Empowered Career Woman: Life, Love, and the Rise to the Top. So I'm doing that in February. So just really expanding how I can reach people and touch people and help them heal and grow in the new year.
I want to come back to another thing you just said, but one of the things that you shared with me earlier is you didn't learn all the technical stuff about how to do a podcast. You found a studio. Tell us about the experience
Right.
of finding the studio.
Oh, yes, it was a wonderful story. So I actually produced the podcast at Whitfield Media Group Studios here in Chattanooga. And in my role as a vice president of marketing, I had helped the owner of the studio, Sean Whitfield, start some of his shows, and I had sponsored him. And when I was meeting with someone talking about the podcast, he came in and he thought it was just a wonderful concept because he himself had been through a divorce. And he emailed me the next day and said, I believe so strongly of the need for this that I want to gift you with 3 months of studio time for this to get this podcast up and going. So 3 months actually ended up being, I think, 5 months of free studio time. So now I have two sponsors on board who help me pay for studio time and some editing. And that's really, my goal is to get to a point where the expenses are covered, but we're not quite there yet. We'll get there. So yeah, it was a wonderful story. He said, you helped me. Without you, my show would not have moved forward. So I want to help you. So yeah.
And what gave you the courage to go back to him and say, hey, this is the concept I've got. What do you think about this? I mean, that's a lot of courage to walk in and do that and be very open about what's going on in your personal life. This was not your business life.
Yeah, and the irony of that is I'm a very private person. I didn't tell anybody I was going through divorce for at least, I think it was 2 or 3 months after I had been served, because I felt so embarrassed that everybody thought we had a fantastic marriage. We were married 34 years. People looked at us as, that ideal couple. And I was embarrassed. How could this happen to me? So how it came about was I asked to meet with a gentleman here in Chattanooga, Clint Powell, who has been podcasting for 8 years and has a number of podcasts, just to pick his brain. I had been on a number of his show as a marketer, and I was meeting with him just to talk about, the podcasting industry. And Sean popped in to say hello because he had heard I was meeting with Clint. So it was just kind of, again, God putting people in my path at the right time, God putting people there when we need them to be there. And that's how it came together. So it's really helped me. One of the things that it's changed in me is how I think of abundance. I think of abundance so differently now. Abundance isn't, the material things or counting your money in your bank every year. I used to do a balance sheet, our net worth statement every 6 months for our marriage. Abundance isn't that anymore. Abundance it's the people I've surrounded myself with who are there, who want to help, who want to be a part of this. Abundance is being at peace. Abundance is being in a state of forgiveness and being able to stay there so that I feel like that I am living out God's calling. And abundance is being able to help people who are going through what I went through. So
you had said earlier, you've come into this space after going through divorce care twice, after reading the Bible, after coming into forgiveness. What would you tell someone who is still embarrassed, is still struggling? What tip would you give them for today, for this weekend, for that aloneness they may feel?
First of all, don't stay in the dark. You would be so surprised at the number of people who have been through what you're going through. And most people have a genuine desire to help others. So, reach out to the people you trust and share with them what you're going through and be vulnerable and honest. And even if you feel as though the divorce was your fault, be vulnerable and honest. And that will be your first step toward being able to heal. The first person I told, it was somebody that I knew was not going to judge, that I knew I could be vulnerable and honest with. And it was like a ton of bricks coming off of my shoulders, just taking that first step. And that person told me things about his life that I didn't even know. So there's a spiritual nature to sharing. And then I would also say, go out to divorcecare.org and find a divorce care group near you. You can join it no matter where they are in the sessions. If they're 8 weeks in or 9 weeks in, just go ahead and join and go to that first session and step out. You will be glad that you did, and it will help you tremendously.
Tell us a little bit more about your podcast and where we can find you, Lisa.
Sure, absolutely. It is the Silver Divorce Podcast, and it is on all the podcasting platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Amazon. It's even on YouTube in the audio podcasting portion of YouTube. And I have a Facebook and Instagram page at Silver Divorce Podcast. So I release new episodes about every 10 days. Go out and subscribe, and they'll automatically come to you. So I look forward to having you listen, and hopefully it'll help in your journey.
Tell us about the new one. When is it going to be
ready? Oh, yes. The new one is called The Empowered Career Woman: Life, Love, and the Rise to the Top. And the first episode I am recording in February. So we'll start pushing episodes out at the end of February. So stay tuned. I'm going to interview women who are CEOs or at the top of their career, and also entrepreneurs. And we're going to talk about the struggles. What did they have to go through? Who were they inspired by? What advice would they have for somebody who is in that career path? And then, what was their life like in their love life? And just have some really great vulnerable conversations.
And I hope somebody comes on and interviews you, or you do a solo episode about your rise to the top.
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride, and it's not over. That's the beauty of podcasting. I retired in 2021, and I didn't plan to go sit on the couch and do nothing, but I certainly didn't plan to be launching podcasts. But I'm loving it. I'm loving every minute of it, and it would not have been possible without what I went through. So many doors have been opened.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And do you want to give a shout out to your studio again, in case anybody's in the Chattanooga area and they are looking for a podcast studio, which can make this so much easier?
Yes, it does. And I'll tell you, it is Whitfield Media Group Studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And a professional studio will, if you are like me and you don't have that technical expertise to go on to GarageBand and do all your own editing and know the ins and outs of the audio software, I highly recommend it. It makes your life so much easier to use a professional studio. And the owner, Sean Whitfield, is just a fabulous human being too. Wonderful to work with.
Well, thank you for sharing your hope story.
Yes.
I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it as well. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Faith Over Addiction podcast. Remember, nothing changes until something changes. Today is your day to step out in faith and make a difference. You are a daughter of the King, a woman who can spark incredible ripple effects of hope and healing, not just in your own life, but in your family, your community, and God's kingdom. If this episode encouraged you, bless someone else by sharing it. Send it to a friend who needs a little hope, or post it on Instagram and tag me. I'd love to hear what resonated most with you. And hey, if you're ready to reclaim your God-given identity and create a safe, loving space for yourself and those you care about, let's talk. Book a quick call with me today, and I'd love to hear your story and help you take the next step. Oh, and don't forget to head over to Apple Podcasts, search for Faith Over Addiction, and leave me a review. Your feedback not only makes my day, but helps other women find this podcast and step into freedom too. You are strong, you are loved, and the joy of the Lord is your strength. Nehemiah 8:10. Until next time, keep walking boldly into the life God has for you.